Tu B'Shvat in Argentina. Do they celebrate Tu B'Shvat in Argentina? When do they celebrate Tu B'Shvat in Argentina? And yeah, I was asked over and over again through Shabbos the question of why Argentina? Is Argentina just something you threw in for the title? Why is there any issue? What is it about when you talk about celebrating Tu B'Shvat? What is there besides not saying Tachanun? Are you asking when they say Tachanun in Argentina? So the answer is no. Argentina is specific. There is more to Tu B'Shvat than just not saying Tachanun, and we're going to find out about it, God willing, over the next 45 minutes or so. A little bit about Jewish life in Argentina first. The original flight of Jews from Europe due to the Inquisition brought Jews primarily to Dutch colonies like Brazil when it was under Holland's control. As a matter of fact, the first Shiloh in the Americas took place back in those early days in Brazil. And it's a Shiloh we'll return to a little bit later, the question of when you say V'sein Talumatar if you're in the southern hemisphere. That's going to be relevant a little bit later. Those Jews who came tended, as I said, to migrate to the Dutch colonies, which were safer, as opposed to Spanish colonies like Argentina. So that Jews who came to Argentina tended to live as conversos. They weren't publicly practicing Judaism. In 1813, Argentina left the Spanish Empire. The Inquisition was abolished there. And at that point, it became freer for Jews. And so Jews came over actually in the middle of the 19th century, when you had the proletariat revolts in Europe in 1847, 1848. Jews who were on both sides fled. Jews who were on the side of the proletariat because they lost, and Jews who were the ones being rebelled against because, well, they were being rebelled against. And in 1853, Argentina's constitution granted them religious freedom. So that the first shul in Argentina is formed in the 1860s. More Jews come over in the 1880s. That's the time when Jews are fleeing from the Pale of Settlement. It's a time of terrible pogroms. Some go to Israel, some go to North America, but some actually go to South America, and some of them worked with Baron Hirsch to actually become cowboys. You wanted to know about Jewish cowboys? Jewish cowboys in Argentina at the end of the 19th century. They actually form a colony in a place called Moiseville. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it the way someone in Argentina would pronounce it. Moise obviously is from Moses, but it's meant to be a Jewish agricultural colony, and they plan others. Today, you can go visit Moiseville. It's actually a tourist site. The Jews are a small population at the end of the 19th century. In 1895, according to the census, there are about 6,000 Jews. But then it just balloons, so that by 1920, there are more than 150,000 Jews living in Argentina. Things go bad, unfortunately, in the 1920s and 1930s. There are problems of anti-Semitism. There's class warfare against small business owners, and many of them are Jewish, as well as against communists, and many Jews are suspected at that point of communism. And there was a general anti-immigration movement, such that immigration was closed in 1938. And you really couldn't get in at that point. That's actually fairly late in the game, when you consider that in the United States it's closed in, I think, 1924. But in any case, things go south for the Jews that was bad. I'm sorry. Things go bad for the Jews at that stage. That wasn't on purpose. There's Juan Perón takes power, or Perón, it takes power in 1946, and he sympathizes with the Axis. He's the one who allows the Nazis like Eichmann to take refuge in the country. On the other hand, he establishes relations with the State of Israel in 1949, and his was the first Argentinian government to allow Jews to hold office. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Perón is overthrown in 1955, and things get worse after that. Into this picture, this abbreviated picture of Argentinian Jewish history, enter Rav Shmuel Glicksberg. Rav Shmuel Glicksberg was Polish. We know that he lived in Poland as late as 1932 because he had a son who was born there at that point. He and his wife, Yehudit Silberberg, at some point moved to Argentina. We don't know a whole lot about his rabbinic career in Argentina. We do have some letters. Interestingly, if you go on eBay, you can find letters that he wrote that are actually up for sale. They're up for auction. Why him in particular? I don't know. His letters survived. There's a letter there from 1961 talking about a shochet that he had examined and saying that the shochet is good. But he becomes the chief rabbi in Buenos Aires in the basically 1940s to 1960s. He had a son who made Aliyah and then came back to Brazil to form a yeshiva there, and became quite well known there. In any case, That's a little bit of background on Rabbi Shmuel Glicksberg, a very little bit. I couldn't really find much more about him. I did do some digging and couldn't really find much. But Rabbi Shmuel Glicksberg writes a letter to Tzvi Pesach Frank at some point in the probably late 1940s, maybe early 1950s, asking him the following question. Our calendar here does not match the calendar in Israel in terms of rainfall. It doesn't match the northern hemisphere. And so I want to know, when exactly should we observe Tu B'Shvat? When do the Jews of Argentina observe Tu B'Shvat? That's and that's our starting point here. So we need to know first what exactly Tu B'Shvat is all about. We know Tu B'Shvat is the birthday for the trees. We know that we celebrate it by having fruit, and particularly fruit from Israel. The Mishnah Berurah mentions that, and we know that we don't say Tachanun. But is there any significance, any halachic significance to Tu B'Shvat beyond that? And is there any significance for it outside of the land of Israel? So in order to understand this, we need to look at a law called Arla. And for everyone who was here during the preparation time, you had a chance, hopefully, to see at least the first few sources and get a sense of this. The Torah says that I'm not allowed to eat the fruit of a tree's first 3 years. So the rule is, until we have a party and invite all the friend trees to mark this tree turning 3 years old, I'm not allowed to eat the fruit of the tree. That's a joke. We don't really have a birthday party. In fact, we don't mark its third birthday on its birthday at all. Let's pretend for the moment that the birthday is the day that I put the seed in the ground. I'm not counting my years on that basis at all. The years of the tree are counted based on the day we term Rosh Hashanah, classically, the 1st of Tishrei. So if I plant the tree in May of 2000, then when I hit Rosh Hashanah, let's pretend Rosh Hashanah is September 15th. In the year 2000, that's year 1. As long as I planted it more than a certain number of days, I believe it's 48, before the 1st of Tishrei, year 1 is hit in September of 2000.
End of year 1.
End of year 1, thank you. September 2001 is the end of year 2. September 2002 is the end of year 3. At that point, I have concluded my tree's 3 years as far as Arla. However, the birthday of a tree is different from the birthday of its fruit. And so what we're going to see is that you can't simply say, so fruit that ripens after September 2002 is considered to be non-Arla, is considered to be permissible, it's considered post-3. It's not true. You could have fruit that actually is produced by the tree after September 2002, and it'll still be considered to be a throwback to those initial 3 years, and the laws of Arla will apply. Is that clear? Do we have that? Okay? We're going to look at the Gemara now, and it's going to throw us off. So I want to make sure that we have it before we get thrown off. Okay? We're good? Okay, thank you. Take a look, please, at source number 1 on your sheets. You should have 2 sheets. One is the sheet with the Hebrew sources, and the second one is a sheet with tables of annual rainfall, or monthly rainfall, really. The tables will come in handy soon. First, we need the sources. So if you take a look at source number 1, it's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah regarding the 1st of Tishrei. The Mishnah, in the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, informed us that the 1st of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for several things, and one of them is Nitiyah. Nitiyah means planting, but planting of trees specifically. Zuriya is the term we use when you talk about planting seeds, the vegetables, that sort of thing, and for trees we use the term Nitiyah. So the Gemara asks, U'nitiyah minalan, how do you know that the 1st of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah as far as trees are concerned? Dichsiv, because the pasuk says, Shalosh shanim arelim, for 3 years your tree will have this law of Arla, Uchsiv u'bashana harabi'is, and then it says, the 4th year, ... And the word shana is thrown in there. It would seem to be unnecessary, because you could have just said, 3 years there'll be arelim, and in the 4th, you didn't need to say, and in the 4th year. That's extra for me. V'yalif shana, shana mi Tishrei. And so, we deduce from this shana here, and a shana that said regarding Tishrei, dichsiv mereshis hashana, a reference to Tishrei as well, that the 1st of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for the tree, in terms of the tree's birthday, for Arla. That's my first source. Then I have a second source, source number 2. And source number 2 comments on the Mishnah's statement that Shvat has the Rosh Hashanah for the trees. Now you'll notice it says Be'echad B'Shvat. That's actually a machlokes in the Mishnah whether we go with the 1st of Shvat or the 15th of Shvat. In practice we work with the 15th of Shvat. During the prep time I learned that it may be because of paying the bills and the 1st of the month there isn't as much money in the house. I'm not entirely sure that that's the distinction between the 1st and the 15th of Shvat. Nonetheless, the Gemara comments on that identification of Shvat as Rosh Hashanah. Be'echad B'Shvat Rosh Hashanah le'ilan. My taima, why would the 1st of Shvat be Rosh Hashanah for the trees? Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Oshia, Ha'ol v'yatzu rov gishmei shana, va'adayin rov tekufa mibachutz. Because most of the year's rain is already gone. Year's rain meaning from Tishrei to the next Tishrei. Most of the year's rain is already gone, and most of the tekufa, the season, the fall rainy season, still remains. So the Gemara says, well, what does that mean? Right? You're not the only one asking that question. The Gemara wants to know. Mike Amar, what did he just say? This is what he said. Even though most of the season remains, most of the year's rain has fallen. If you take a look at the sheet with the tables of rainfall in various countries, you can't compare, let me just note, you can't compare the quantities of rain that are in each country because each one is on a different scale. If you can read the fine print on the left side of the tables, you see that in one the max line is 200 millimeters, the next one is 700 millimeters. It's not as though these are actually comparable from country to country. The point is only to show the flow of rain through the year. So if you look at the second table, that's the one for Tel Aviv, you see a major spike in September. Now, this came off of a site, weatherandclimate.com. I also took a look at a few other sites. They roughly agree. They may skew a couple of weeks earlier, a couple of weeks later, but they're in basic agreement. So the table for Israel shows a major spike in the Rosh Hashanah period in rainfall. Then you got nothing for a couple of months, and then you get to the second flow of rains that come January, February at the end of the rainy season. But your major rain is indisputably coming right after Rosh Hashanah. That's when you have your Rov Gishmei Shana, which is exactly what the Gemara is observing. The Gemara is saying that's when most of your year's rain happens. So by the time you hit Tu B'Shvat, certainly, you've gone through your first batch of rain in September, you've gone through your January rains possibly as well, depending on the year. This year Tu B'Shvat is going to be mid-January. Next year Tu B'Shvat is going to be early to mid-February. But you've definitely concluded most of the year's rain by that time if you are in Israel. Take a look at any of the other charts that you have on here. Buenos Aires on top. China sort of matches. The Shanghai chart sort of a little bit matches, but nothing. I have Dijon, France, only because that's close to where Rashi lived, and Rashi is going to figure into this into a big way. So I gave you the French one. I gave you Pittsburgh also because the weather and climate site, which is the one that had the neat tables, didn't have one for Toronto. This was actually the closest one to Toronto that I could find. So I gave you Pittsburgh, and then I also gave you Melbourne, Australia, for an example of another one from the southern hemisphere. No one else matches what you're seeing in Israel in terms of rainfall. They're just not. The Middle East has a climate which in this sense is unique. Yes?
It does seem a little odd because, I mean, if you just go by that, and obviously, I don't know if this is an average or a particular year, you could say Rov Gishmei Shana fell by October as well, right?
Yes.
And I'm also just remembering rains falling in November, December pretty seriously.
Right. So this is definitely an average. It's not from a specific year. And it's true that the chart does not allow for the fact that there are times when you'll have a little bit of rain, but the argument would be that in most years the major rain is occurring either in the beginning of the rainy season, the September-October time, or just before Tu B'Shvat in January. That's when you're going to see it. That would be the idea. So, I have a source in the Gemara for the idea that Rosh Hashanah for the trees should be the 1st of Shvat, the 1st of Tishrei, and then I have another source that indicates that since most of the rain falls by Tu B'Shvat, Rosh Hashanah for the trees is in Shvat. What exactly is happening in Shvat? In what sense is it a Rosh Hashanah for the trees? So for the trees or for the fruit? The answer is that even though we said that if I plant my tree in March of 2000, September 2000 is the end of year 1. September 2001 is the end of year 2. September 2002 is the end of year 3. If any fruit starts to develop, it undergoes a process called chanata before Tu B'Shvat, after Rosh Hashanah in 2002, after September 2002, that fruit is considered to be a throwback to the previous year. That's the idea. It's part of the Arla series. Even though the fruit was only formed in, let's say, November, right? I'm making that up. But let's say I had an apple tree, and my fruit was first formed in October, November, hypothetically. I would view that fruit as Arla fruit, as though it had been from the 3 years, even though it's not. It's from year 4. Take a look at Rashi, please. Source number 3. Rashi hopes to explain why this would be so. Ho'il v'yatzu rov gishmei shana, because the majority of the year's rain has gone. Shekvar ava rov yemos hageshamim. Most of the days of rain have already passed. Shehu zman revi'ah. This is the time of the rain making the soil fertile. Revi'ah is a term that we use regarding animals and people, regarding conception, regarding procreation, and it's a term used for the effect of the rain on the ground. Va'ala hasraf be'ilanot. The sap has risen in the trees, which happens, generally speaking, before the first buds come out. The sap rises in the trees. V'nimtzu aperos chontin me'ata. And the fruit undergoes chanata. The fruit starts to form, starting now. So according to Rashi, the idea is, and what the Gemara is trying to express to me is, that Tu B'Shvat is the first of the year. Tu B'Shvat marks Rosh Hashanah for the trees, because now is when your rain has come, and the sap is starting to rise, and now the fruits are going to start coming out. That's Rashi. Tosfos has a different explanation of what's going on in this Gemara. Take a look at source number 4. I excerpted just a quick line from Tosfos. He says, Be'echa b'shvat ma'itayma, that's the beginning of the Tosfos. V'chol ha'chanutin kodem zman hazeh, all fruit that develops before this time, hainu al gishmei shana shalefnei tishrei, is from the rain that fell last year. According to Tosfos, the idea is that the fruit that develops during the period between Rosh Hashanah, September, and Tu B'Shvat in January, February, anything that develops, any fruit that develops in between, is actually feeding off of rain from before Rosh Hashanah. And therefore it's fed by Orla rain, and that's what I care about. That's how I determine the identity of this fruit. It's based on when the parents, so to speak, the tree, had rain. Difference is a very important one. According to Tosfos, the Rosh Hashanah really is the first of Tishrei. It's just that I won't know until Tu B'Shvat which fruit fed off of before Tishrei and which fruit fed from after Tishrei. Whereas according to Rashi, no. Rosh Hashanah is in Shvat. That's when the rain. That's when the rainy season ends. And that's when I would say that your new year for the fruit begins. Rav Asher Ginsburg, who wrote the Shagas Aryeh, who wrote the Guros Ari, also the Turei Even, if you take a look in source number 5, spelled this out. He says, Mashma midivrayim, it appears from the words of Tosfos. Hada Amar Rabbi Elazar, that which Rabbi Elazar said in source number 2, Hoel v'yatza rov gishmei shana, that the majority of the year's rain has already been completed. Hainu mishum da'chanutin kodem Shvat wa gishmei shana shalifnei Tishrei, is because the fruit that ripens before Shvat actually ripens off of the rain from before Tishrei. Ulefizeh, based on this, Rosh Hashanah le'ilah nami Tishreihu k'mo b'tvuah v'zeisim. Rosh Hashanah for the trees really is in Tishrei, just like it is for grain, just like it is for olives. Olives are in a unique category. Ushvat gilui milsa be'almahu. Shvat, the arrival of Shvat, is only a demonstration of reality. Da'chanutin kodem lo huwa gishmei shana shalifnei Tishrei. It indicates that fruit that's developed by now is actually from before Tishrei. That's what he says Tosfos is trying to say. So Rashi is telling me, this is important to know when we hit Argentina. This is the substance of things. The Rashi is telling me all I care about is the rainy season. That's all I want to know. When do the year's rains finish? Or when does the majority of the rain finish? Whereas according to Tosfos, that's not what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about when the fruit is ripening and which fruit is ripening off of last year's rain versus this year's rain. How does Tosfos, or really the Gemara in Tosfos' understanding, how does he determine when the fruit is ripening off of last year's rain and when the fruit is ripening off of the New Year's rain? We don't know. He doesn't give us the mechanism. He simply says that's what the Gemara is doing. It's working based on last year's rain versus the current year's rain. Scientists to this day work on this question of exactly which rain is important, which water do you need in order for things to work out. When I was preparing the shiur, I went through chart after chart, paper after paper on the growth of wheat until I realized I was dealing with Arla. But on the growth of wheat in different countries and the impact of drought at different points in the season, trying to figure out when the rainfall affects it and when the rainfall does not affect it. And there's a lot of work that's been done on this field, but Tosfos says, the Gemara is telling you, this is it. By Tu B'Shvat, the effect of last year's rain is gone. Now, after Tu B'Shvat, it's going to be working off of the rain that fell after Tishrei. However, the Torah MiTzion points out a problem, which is that Tosfos' theory doesn't fit the Gemara at all. Right? The last few words in that source number 5, the Torah MiTzion says, "V'lishna de Gemara lo mashmahachi." The Gemara doesn't sound like Tosfos at all. Go back to the Gemara that was in source number 2. The Gemara there said, even though most of the season is out, even though most of the season has not yet happened, ho'el v'yatzu rov gishmei shana. Most of the rain has already fallen. He doesn't say anything about whether the fruit is ripening or developing off of new year rain or old rain. It's not there at all. And so he says, you know why? Because that's not where Tosfos got his idea from. Tosfos didn't get his idea from our Gemara from the Bavli. Tosfos got his idea from the Yerushalmi, source number 6. And after this source, everything gets easy. So as long as we get through source number 6, we're going to be good for the rest of the time. Rabbi Zeura, also known as Rabbi Zeira if you're reading in the Bavli, Rabbi Elah, and Rabbi Lazer, who is Rabbi Elazar, B'Shem Rabbi Hoshaya. They had a debate. Chilku, I added in. The words that are in brackets are words that I added in. So they had a machlokes. Rabbi Zeura is debating with Rabbi Elah, who is citing Rabbi Elazar, who is citing Rabbi Hoshaya. Chad Omar kvar yatsu rov gishmei shana kula ukvar ruba shel tkufa mibachutz. One of them said what we saw in the Bavli, that most of the year's rain is gone. That's it. That's my marker. That's like Rashi. Most of the year's rain is done. V'charna Omar, beginning of the second line. Charna means the other. Acher, acharon, that same idea. V'charna Omar, ad kan hin chayin mimei hashana sha'avra. He said, up until now, the fruit is developing, living off of last year's rain. Mikan v'helech, and from here on, hin chayin mimei hashana haba. They're coming from next year's rain. That's the idea. I'm going to skip the rest of the source, not because it's not interesting, but because of the interest of time and clarity. But the point is that Rashi and Tosfos' views both appear in a debate in the Yerushalmi. So again, according to one, it's about the fruit that's developing, that's Tosfos. According to Rashi, it's about the rain that's falling. And so we come back to Argentina. And so we come back to our major questions, which I put on your source sheet. According to Rashi, that it's about rainfall. What happens if the majority of the year's rainfall, Tishrei to Elul rainfall, does not occur before Tu B'Shvat? Right? Like the calendar in any of these countries that we just listed. It doesn't fit. And according to Tosfos, what if produce starts ripening from post Rosh Hashanah rain before Tu B'Shvat? What if? Then what do I do? How, do I observe Tu B'Shvat that day or not? So it's important to remember what Tu B'Shvat is in order to understand the answer to the question. 2 points. Number 1, the Gemara is in the habit, the Chachamim were in the habit, of picking cutoffs. The Gemara in Yuma talks about this and stresses this point. Picking cutoffs. To say, here is my cutoff for various laws. When a kid is considered bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. At what point Shabbos comes in and at what point Shabbos ends. You had to pick certain times and say a second before it is no good, a second after it is good. A second before it is good, a second after it is no good. For example, take the bar mitzvah case. We say the boy is 13 in a day, the girl is 12 in a day. That's it. Now they are an adult. Irrespective of the characteristics, the physical characteristics that they should have to develop to demonstrate adulthood. Except when you get to Del Risas, that's a separate discussion. The point is, they pick cutoff dates. So even if the cutoff date won't be accurate for everybody, this is your cutoff because you need a cutoff. And the same thing is true over here. Tu B'Shvat is my cutoff, even though it may not apply in most years, even though it may not apply in certain countries. Tu B'Shvat is still going to be my cutoff. They had to pick one. They're not going to tell you every year, go out and investigate the fruit on the trees and see if it's ripening off of last year's rain. Or go out and measure your rainfall and see whether most of the year's rain has happened. And at that point, you'll declare the Arla season is over. It's impossible to assign that to everybody. They give a cutoff instead. That's number one. Number two, how do we determine the date Tu B'Shvat? How do you get Tu B'Shvat? I don't mean how does the Gemara pick Tu B'Shvat. That we spent the last 20 minutes on. But how do I know when Tu B'Shvat is? I give to it stock and they send me a luach in the mail. I know, but how do? Sorry.
From Rosh Chodesh Shvat, which goes back.
Right.
To Rosh Chodesh.
Right. We know Rosh Chodesh Shvat was Thursday, right? So we add 2 weeks, so it gets Tu B'Shvat, right? How do we determine Rosh Chodesh Shvat? By the moon. By the moon. We do it based on the moon, right? And we have a fixed calendar now, but it's a lunar-based calendar. Tell me something. On what does the rainfall determine? Let me say that again in English. What determines the year's rainfall? Whether it's going to be early or later or whatever? Solar seasons, right? We are picking a lunar date, Tu B'Shvat, to mark the end of the bulk of the year's rain, or how the fruit is ripening. But this year, Tu B'Shvat, we said, is going to be mid-January. Next year, Tu B'Shvat is going to be early in February. It's a lunar date for a solar phenomenon, right? And the answer is they needed to pick a cutoff, and they picked the cutoff. But it's worth noting and worth understanding that fundamentally, Tu B'Shvat is an artificial date. And that's going to affect what we do in this conversation. Now, the Shaila is asked of Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, and he puts it in his Tshuvos Har Tzvi. It's Chelek Beis, Tshuva Chavtes. The question also comes up later on regarding Australian produce with a separate halacha. We may get to that, and it's addressed by Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in his Mincha Shlomo, Chelek Aleph, Samach Beis, Sif Vav. The question doesn't come up until the 1940s, 1950s, even though Jews have been living there already for centuries. Why isn't anyone asking the question earlier? They asked the V'sein Talumatar question. I think the answer has to do with the nature of Jews who were living there and the type of observance that they had. Jews who came over, certainly the original conversos, but in general, the Jews who came over to the Americas in the 17th century, 18th century, were not necessarily attentive to issues like Arla outside of Israel, which we're going to see is in and of itself an odd law. And therefore they're just not paying attention. It isn't until you get the Jews who are coming over fleeing from the Germans and fleeing from World War II that you find people who are actually watching for Arla as a concern, and that's when the question is asked. That seems to be why the question takes so long to develop, as opposed to V'sein Talumatar. We know very well that the Jews who lived in South America and in Central America in the 17th century were davening, were setting up shuls. That we're very aware of. So V'sein Talumatar, you ask right away. Arla requires a greater degree of sophistication and attention to detail before someone's actually going to ask that question. So Tzvi Pesach Frank offers 3 approaches. His first approach is to say, you know what, we follow Tosfos anyway. He says, it's true, you're right. The rainfall doesn't match. It doesn't match Israel's rainfall. You're not having the majority of a year's rain done by then. But only Rashi cared about that anyway. He says, take a look at source number 7. Source number 7 is the line in Shulchan Aruch about Arla. After Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, the end of the 3rd year for the tree, all the fruit that develops before Tu B'Shvat has the same law of Arla, like we said, between September 2002 and Tu B'Shvat the following year, even though the fruit is completed afterwards. So the Shach writes on that, the Shach standard commentary to the Shulchan Aruch of Shabbos HaKohen, source number 8, De'ilan gadil al rov hamayim shel shana she'avra. The tree is growing based on the rain of the previous year. V'chol shu chonet kodem chamisha asar b'shvat, and anything that starts to develop, any fruit that starts to develop before Tu B'Shvat, hainu machmas yitzikas mayim shel lefnei Rosh Hashanah, is because of the pouring of the water that occurred before Rosh Hashanah. So the Shach says the reason for the Shulchan Aruch is because we follow Tosfos. We don't follow Rashi. So it doesn't matter to me, says Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, whether your rain calendar doesn't match what's going on in Israel. It doesn't make a difference, because we follow Tosfos. And Tosfos' rule still pertains. Fruit that's ripening between Rosh Hashanah and Tu B'Shvat is ripening off of last year's rain. How does he know that? So listen to what Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank actually wrote in his tshuva. He says, Hadavarim kal v'chomer. He says it's logical. Im ba'aratzo shezman hageshamim hu bein tishrei letu b'shvat amrin dechanitas peros shabiyam elei mikoach hasrav shenivla be'ilan kodem Rosh Hashanah. He says if in lands where the rain falls between Tishrei and Tu B'Shvat, we still say that fruit ripens based on what was absorbed before Rosh Hashanah. Mikol shekain ba'Argentina. When I say Argentina spelled in Hebrew, certainly in Argentina, she'ein geshamim bein Rosh Hashanah letu B'Shvat. Certainly in Argentina, where there is no rain between Rosh Hashanah and Tu B'Shvat, sha'chanata sha'kodem Tu B'Shvat hi me'asraf she'nivla bo kodem Rosh Hashanah. That the chanata, the fruit development that takes place before Tu B'Shvat, is from what was absorbed before Rosh Hashanah. That's his statement. Is he right? No. Why not? Because you look at your table. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank is under the impression that there is no rainfall going on between Rosh Hashanah and Tu B'Shvat. I look at my chart, and not just what weatherandclimate.com tells me, but all the charts I look at. And Rav Shmuel Glicksberg, living in Argentina, presumably knows this. And there's rain falling year-round. You certainly can't make the claim that the majority of the year's rain is falling in those months. You could say there's more rain in those months. Right? I'm sorry, the other way around. It's the other way around. He said there's no rain falling. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank said there's no rain falling between Rosh Hashanah and Tu B'Shvat. If anything, it's the opposite. You have more rain falling between October and February than you do, say, between May and September. This is a problem. Right? It doesn't seem to work. We don't have a record of Rav Glicksberg's response to Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank. We don't know if he just said thank you very much or if he went into detail. We don't know, but there is no follow-up tshuva in the Har Tzvi. But this is definitely something to keep in mind. Second answer that he gives. He points out, someone pointed this out also during our preparation, that this idea that we're expressing here, that while we go by the rainfall and we go by the absorption and all of that, doesn't really work for many trees. If you take a look on your sheets in source number 9, the Turei Even, again that's Rav Asher Ginsburg, points this out. He says, Akru Chachamim shal ilan mi Tishrei v'kavu b'Shvat in source number 9. The Chachamim removed the Rosh Hashanah for the trees from Tishrei, moved it into Shvat. V'afilu ba'anavim de meiser didhu min ha'Torah, even grapes for which the meiser is biblical. That's its own discussion. V'hachinami l'inyan Shvias, the same thing is true for Shemitah. Denoeg min ha'Torah b'chol ilanos, which is a biblical rule for all trees. Ha'ol v'derech ilanos ruban lachnot b'Shvat. Because most trees have their fruit develop in Shvat, start to develop in Shvat. V'zez man kavua le'lachnot. That's the fixed time when they develop. As linan basar chanata. So we go with when the fruit starts to develop. He says the majority of trees fit that. Therefore, we'll apply it to all trees. So says Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank in his response on the issue, since you're willing to go with the majority of trees, you could also go with the majority of countries. Just add C-O-U-N in front. He didn't say that. He says, Hine madgish ha-Turei Even sh'lepirish Rashi halchu bazeh basar rov. He says the Turei Even made the point that according to Rashi, who goes by rainfall, we're following the majority. He says same thing true here. He assumes that the majority of countries in fact fit what's going on in Israel. Right? That's the assumption he's making. The majority of countries fit. I don't know how you even begin to calculate the majority of countries. Do you go by landmass? Do you go by planting areas? Do you go by where people live? Do you go by where Jews live? How in the world do you calculate majority of countries? That's a very hard thing to say. Not only that, if your name is Rashi, then you believe we go by the pattern of rainfall during the year. But if you take a look at the tables that I gave you there is no one else who fits what's going on in Israel. Rov Aratzos don't fit that. Now, I have no problem with that because I follow Tosfos. But it's worth noting that Rashi can't believe that we're following the majority of countries. So I have a problem with his first and second arguments. Okay? Again, to sum up where we've gone so far, we said, number one, that Tu B'Shvat is picked based on either the year's rainfall, has the majority of rain fallen between 1st of Tishrei and Tu B'Shvat, or based on when is the fruit ripening, when is the fruit developing off of the rain from before Rosh Hashanah or after Rosh Hashanah. That's Tosfos' point of view. His first explanation, the first explanation of Har Tzvi was, well, we follow Tosfos, and Tosfos works for Argentina. Because I know the fruit that ripens after Tu B'Shvat is ripening off of the New Year's rain, and anything that ripens between Tishrei and Tu B'Shvat must be ripening on the Old Year's rain, because there is no rain between Rosh Hashanah and Tu B'Shvat. Which isn't true. That was number one. And then number two, his second argument was, well, we go by most countries. But if you're Rashi, then most countries don't fit. However, we have his third argument, and his third argument does seem to, so to speak, hold water. And here we go with his third argument. And this is the one I think some people anticipated. I mentioned earlier the first tshuva, the first responsum that was issued regarding Jewish life in the Americas was the question of whether you say, or when you say, v'sein talu matar. When do we daven for rain? I'm going to make a long story short. The Gemara itself says that we daven for rain in Israel, starting with the 7th of Cheshvan, right? You would start from Shmini Atzeres, but you want to give the Jews who came for Sukkot a chance to get out of Israel before the rain comes. So therefore, you only start davening the 7th of Cheshvan. That's when you say V'sein talu matar. If you're not in Israel, then you start davening for rain a certain number of days after the Tekufa. It comes out to December 3rd, December 4th, December 5th, depending on what century you live in. That's the split that the Gemara makes. But what do you do if you're living in a country where that's not at all the time you should be asking for rain? Do you still do it on that basis? If you live in the southern hemisphere and your seasons are off and your growing season is off, when do you daven for rain? Well, that question was asked, and the answer was this is an old issue, because it was raised by the Rosh. The Rosh asked this question already back in the 13th century, and he actually said each country should really be following its own schedule. The idea was not, argued the Rosh, it's in source number 10, the idea was not that Israel will be one thing and the rest of the world would be another. It's that every country would really have its own system. Take a look, please, at source number 10. Mikvar yamim rabim ba'ashkenaz nisra'amti al shnei devarim shara'isi shenagim b'yamim halalo. He says, this is a long time already that I was having this problem, that I complained about two things that I saw. Ha'echad she'enon sholin hageshamim kitikun. And the first was that they don't ask for rain properly. Ve'afa gav darmina b'perka kama de Tanis. Granted, the Gemara in Tanis says, Tanya, Chananya, Omer, Ubagola, and Shishim Yom L'Tekufa. Chananya says that at the 60th day of the Tekufa, that's when you start asking for rain. V'amar Rav Huna bar Chia amar Shmuel halacha k'Chananya, and we rule that way. And granted, Anan b'chol milsa azlin and basar chachme bava v'avdin and kavasaya. We always follow the Babylonian sages, and we practice what they say. Heicha de pligi ha'adadi chachme bavel ha'chachme Eretz Yisrael, where there's a debate between the sages of Babel and the sages of Israel. Granted, that's true. The Talmud Bava Chashvid on Ikar, because the Babli is the essence. But hani mili bidvar iser v'heter v'chiyav u'ptur tuma v'tara. That's where there's a debate about law. Aval davar atoli b'tzarach hashav ve'ein bo shinu lavar al divrei Torah roy levech achar hashanim v'makomos v'azman. He says that's not the case for v'sein talu matar. The only mitzvah we have is daven for your needs, and your needs vary based on where you are. It's not as though if I daven for v'sein talu matar one day and he's davening another day, we violated some law in the Torah. We do it based on our needs. And so the Rosh argued everybody's doing it wrong. Now, the tshuva of the Rosh continues to record what happened in his campaign and how everybody disagreed with him, and he recanted. He said, you know what? If everybody else disagrees with me, I have to keep my mouth closed. A remarkable phenomenon in and of itself. The idea that, you know, when everybody else disagrees, even though I'm sure I'm right, I actually have to stop arguing. But that's what the Rosh did. His argument remains in a discussion in the Ramah, where the Ramah writes that if one made a mistake in davening, and he said V'sein talumata at the wrong time, but it's a time when his own land actually needs rain, then he would not go back. So rules the Ramah. He would not go back and repeat, because you have this view of the Rosh. The Ramah is in Archaim Kuf Yud Zayin.
That's halakha l'maisa today?
That's what the Ramah says. That's all I'm saying. Halakha l'maisa, you have to ask a shul rav. But the point is that what emerges from this is that the Rosh loses, the Rosh doesn't win in this conversation, and because the Rosh doesn't win in the conversation, the result is that we say you don't follow your own country. You follow whatever country sets the standard. In Israel, you follow Israel. Outside of Israel, you're following Bavel. And says the Har Tzvi, the same thing is going to apply when it comes to our conversation. Because the mitzvah we're concerned about is the mitzvah of Arla. And the Torah specifically says Arla applies when? Kisavo'u el haaretz, when you enter Israel. Arla is an Israel-specific mitzvah. Now, that's not entirely true. Take a look at source number 11. Gemara in Kiddushin. Tanan Hasan. It quotes a Mishnah which says, "Hachadash asur min haTorah b'chol makom." Chadash, the new grain, is asur until the second of Pesach. No matter where you are, Israel, outside of Israel, whatever. That's a great discussion in its own right. The Arla, halacha. Arla applies everywhere. Halacha. What does halacha mean? So first it says hakilayim midivrei sofrim, kilayim outside of Israel is derabanan. But then the Gemara says, "My halacha." What do you mean when you say that Arla is halacha? Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel Hilchas Medina. Rabbi Yehuda says, citing Shmuel, it means minhag. That's the custom of the land. We don't eat from the tree's fruit in the first 3 years as a matter of minhag, a matter of custom. Ula Amar Rabbi Yochanan halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Ula says, citing Rabbi Yochanan, Arla applies outside of Israel as a halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Well, what does that mean? Is that biblical or is it not biblical? Halacha l'Moshe miSinai technically means this is something that Jews do, that Jews have always done, that doesn't have a pasuk. That's what halacha l'Moshe miSinai means. We know we've always done it. I don't have a pasuk in the Torah. It must be that Hashem told Moshe at Sinai that this is what we do. That's the definition. So what's the strength of Arla outside of Israel? So because it's already 40 minutes in, I'm not going to go through this in great depth. I brought you here sources 13 and 14 in particular, but basically the idea is this. The She'iltos, the work of Rav Achai Gaon, says that it's deoraisa, it's biblical, but the essence is still in Israel because the pasuk said Israel. The Rambam, on the other hand, seems to take it as not even biblical. Because the Rambam says that if I violate Arla outside of Israel, I'm getting makas mardus. Makas mardus is the penalty for violating rabbinic law, not the penalty for violating biblical law. And Rav Chaim, writing on the Rambam, Rav Chaim Brisker in source 14, explains that in fact the Rambam is saying that there is a mitzvah of Arla in Israel, that's the biblical mitzvah, and then there's a separate mitzvah of Arla outside of Israel. And the essence is Arla in Israel. He also gives you a practical application, an afkamina for that as well. It's a great discussion, but it's just not going to happen right now. The point is that Arla's essential mitzvah is Israel specific. So says Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, since Arla's essential mitzvah is Israel specific, we go with the Israeli calendar. In Israel, the rule is Tu B'Shvat, because their rain works out, because their fruit ripening works out. That's what you're going to do no matter where you are in the world. That's where you are going to observe Tu B'Shvat. That's the position that he takes. So Shlomo Zalman Auerbach dealt with this issue also in his Mincha Shlomo, not as far as Arla, but as far as Truma and Maaser, regarding produce from Australia that was brought to Israel and actually finished its ripening in Israel and therefore required Truma and Maaser separation midrabanan. And he gave the same answer in source 15 He says, "V'nira dekevan shenaktinan demasrosei and rak midrabanan." Since we say their meiser is derabanan, mistaber she'ein lachalek. It makes sense that we should not distinguish v'dinam keperos haaretz, and their status is the same as that of the fruit of Israel. That's the system that he recommends. By the way, that last source on the page is just a very interesting article about predicting climate in South America and predicting rainfall and the accuracy of a computer model versus the accuracy of observations. And then and the only reason I bring it here is because if you do want to get a good sense of rainfall in South America and when the rainy season is, that's a good site to look at. But again, just to give a quick review of what we said, aside from the initial history, the purpose of Tu B'Shvat is meant to be the birthday of the fruit at the end of the 3-year cycle. I planted my tree March of 2000, then Rosh Hashanah, the first of Tishrei in 2000 is year 1. Rosh Hashanah, I shouldn't say Rosh Hashanah, the first of Tishrei, September we'll call it, in 2001 is the end of year 2. In 2002, it's the end of year 3. Right? And then the fruit that grows between then and January or February of the following year is the fruit whose status is in question. According to Rashi, that fruit is considered arla because the major rainfall of the year is falling now between Tishrei and Tu B'Shvat. According to Tosfos, that is considered to be arla fruit because the fruit is ripening off of last year's rain. Good. So what do I do about countries that don't match the system? So Tzvi Pesach Frank offers 3 arguments. His first argument is that it's okay, we follow Tosfos, and that rule is going to be the same even in the southern hemisphere. Fruit that ripens between September and February is ripening off of the last year's rainfall. And we'll go with Tosfos. His second approach is to say you follow the majority of countries, just like we say this rule, we fix a date, not arbitrarily, but artificially. We fix a date artificially based on what happens in the majority of trees. So do we fix it based on the majority of countries? We already know it's not entirely accurate. As I pointed out, it's a lunar date for a solar phenomenon. So we know it's not going to be entirely accurate. And then the third is to say, look, the law you're worried about is Arla. Arla is primarily an Israel law, and therefore we follow the rules based on the calendar in Israel.